In this video, we're going to build this React Tic Tac Toe game with hooks. So you'll be able to track the history and see which player is next as we play. It will be able to detect if there is a winner. And we can go back in time. We can go back each step of the way back in time, and we can start over. Really quick before we get into it, today's video is sponsored by Atlantic.net. Atlantic.net provides great VPS hosting, and they are offering a free 1 gig virtual server with SSDs and block storage for free for a year, plus $25 in free credits to use for other services they offer if you use the link in the description below. It's super easy to use. After I signed up, I was able to provision a new server in less than 30 seconds. They also have incredible reliability and redundancy on their servers. So try Atlantic.net to develop, test, or launch your next project. Click the link in the description below and use the code STACKER to get your $25 in credit. All right, I've got a React application here that I just used npx create React app, and I deleted everything within the source folder, and then I recreated these files here. So I have an index.js, an index.css, a helper.js, and then we have 3 components. The main component is the game, and then we have the board, and then the individual squares. So let's go through each of these files. We're going to start from the smallest component and work our way up. So the smallest component is the square. So the first thing we'll do here is import React. Oops. React from React. And then we're going to create a functional component here. So we'll say const square equals, and then we're going to destructure. So this is going to be our props. We're going to destructure the props into value and on click. And then this arrow function. So what we're going to do here is we're going to return a button, and we'll say on click is going to equal on click. We're passing this through the props. And then within this, we'll have our value. And so that's going to be the X or the O. And then we'll need to export default and square. All right, and the reason why I didn't do an implicit return here is because I'm going to create another constant here, and we're going to name this style. And this is going to equal value. It's going to be a ternary operator. So I've got a class that I want to assign, and I have a secondary class that I want to assign only if the value is not null. I'll go more into depth into this in just a minute. So the class is called squares, and then we're going to use value. And if value is null, then we just want squares. All right, and so we're going to pass that style here. So we'll say class name equals style. Just like that. Okay, so I'm not going to go over all of the CSS in this video. The code will be on GitHub, and I'll have a link in the description so you can check out the CSS there. But just briefly, so I have this squares, and that is a class here in the CSS. So right here, squares. And then I also have an X and an O class, and that's where the value comes from. So on X's, I want them to be red and O's green. So if we go back, that's where this value comes in. So if value is not null, it's either going to be X or O. And I want that to be passed as a class as well. And if it's null, then I just want it to be squares by itself. All right, let me save that, and let's go into the board. So on the board, again, we're going to import React from React. And then we're also going to import square from square. And then let's create a functional component. We're going to call this board. And again, we're going to destructure. So we'll say squares and on click. And then arrow function. This will have an implicit return. Here we're going to create a div. And I'm going to add a class name here. In our CSS, there is a class of board. Within this div, we're going to say squares.map. And we're going to take our square and our index. Okay, so then we'll say square. Here's our square component. And then key. For this instance, because it's so simple, we are going to use the index, but generally you want to have a key, an actual key. And if you're working with an API, you're always going to be passed a key, most likely. So try not to use indexes, but again, because this is such a simple example, we're just going to go ahead and use the index. All right, so then the value is going to be, we're going to pass square. And then on click, we're going to pass, have an arrow function here. And then on click, and pass in the index. And then self-close that. That should be it. Let's export default and board. All right. So we're mapping over each square, and then we're passing the square into the square component along with the index. All right, now let's make our way back up to the main component here, which is game. And all of the logic pretty much is all inside of the game. So first we're going to import React. We're also going to import useState. So we'll just go ahead and destructure that from React. We're also going to import the board from board. Oops, not square, board. And then let's create a const game equals arrow function. And we're going to have a few constants here. So let's create our history first. So we'll say const and then history and set history. And that is going to equal useState. And so we have to set this. So we're always going to have, in Tic Tac Toe, we're going to have 3 across and 3 down. So there's 9 things that we need to keep track of. All right, so that's going to be an array. Let's have the initial value be an array of 9 things. And then we're going to fill that with null. Right, so that's the initial state. All right, I'm going to set another constant. This is going to be our step number. So what step are we on? And then we're going to say set step number. And then that is going to equal useState. And the initial step is going to be 0. Right, and then we'll say const. Then we're going to say x is next. Next. And then set x is next. All right, equals useState again. And the initial value is going to be true. X is always going to start first, so X will always be true initially. All right, then we're going to keep track of winner. So we're going to actually bring something in. We need to bring in another thing. Let's import destructure. Whoops. Destructure this. Calculate winner. And that is going to come from the helper. All right, let's look at that real quick. Helper.js. So this Tic Tac Toe game example actually comes from the React documentation. But in their documentation, they use classes. And I wanted to redo that and actually do it with hooks instead. But this helper function, calculate winner, I am pulling directly from the React website. And so what this does is it goes through and it takes each line or each combination of possible wins. So there are a total of 9 items in the array, and there are only 8 possible scenarios where you can win. So this goes through the array and it checks to see if you have a winning combination. All right, so back to our game. We're going to take this calculate winner from our helper, and we're going to pass it our history with our step number. So history is just our array of all of the steps that we've taken. No matter what step we're on, we can pass this into calculate winner and find out if there has been a winner. All right, and then I'm going to create one more constant, and I'm going to call this XO. And this is basically to decide whether we're going to put an X or an O in the square. So we're going to say is, or X is next. If that is true, then we're going to pass X. If that is not true, we're going to say O. All right, so let's go ahead and set up our handle click. So this is the onClick function that we passed all the way down to our square. So if we click on that square, we pass the index up. So let's create a constant. We'll call this history point. So at what point in history are we? We're going to say history.slice 0 and then step number plus 1. All right, so we're going to take whatever point in history we're at. We only want to know from the beginning to that point, nothing after it. We don't care about anything after the actual point in history that we're at. And then we'll say const current equals history point, and then the step number. Okay, so we have our entire history. There could be some stuff before that, but nothing after. And the current point is the current point in our history. Right, so now we're going to create a copy of our squares, or of our current history, basically. So we're going to say squares equals, and then we're going to use a spread operator with current. All right, so we're creating a copy of our current history. Current, again, is everything from the beginning to the current point in time. All right, so now we're going to say return if won or occupied. All right, so we're going to say if winner or squares I, then return. All right, so if there has been a winner or if squares I is occupied. So basically what's happening is if you're clicking on a square and it already has an X or an O in it, it's just going to return. It's not going to do anything else. Or if you're clicking on squares and there's already been a winner, the game's over, so there's no more clicking. Right? And then if the game is not over and the square has not already been clicked, then let's select the square. All right, so here we're going to say squares I equals XO. That's what we created right up here, this constant. This is either going to be an X or an O, depending on whose turn it is. So we're just going to set that right there. All right, now we need to set our history. So that is going to be, again, we're going to spread our history point and then add our current squares. All right, so all of the history before our current point plus the square that we just clicked. Right, and then we also need to set our step number. And that's going to be our history point dot length. And then set X is next. And that is going to be basically the opposite of what its current state is. So we'll say bang X is next. Right, so that's just going to make it opposite. All right, let's go ahead and create our return. All right, so we're going to create a fragment here. Oops. Fragment, empty fragment. And then we're going to create an H1, and we'll say React Tic Tac Toe with hooks. All right. After that, we're going to have our board, and we need to pass our board the squares. So that is going to equal history and step number. And then pass the on click. That's going to equal our handle click. And then self-close that. Next, we're going to create a div with the class name. And that is going to equal info wrapper. That's in the CSS. Within that, we will have an H3. And that's just going to say history, just a label. And then we're going to create a function to render our history here. So let's add that. It's going to be called render moves. And we'll create that in just a minute. Let's just finish this out. After that, we're going to have another H3. And let's see, inside that, it's going to say, we're going to have our winner. So let's say if winner is true, then we'll say winner. And then that will be winner. Or we'll say next player. And that will be XO, whatever that is, X or O. All right, and let's close that H3. Oops, why is there an H3 here? Div, that should not be there. Interesting. This H3 should be, these have, the info wrapper has a flex box on it. So I need to wrap these in a div. There we go. Oh, where'd my fragment go now? Okay. So add our fragment. Now we should be okay. And then lastly, at the bottom, let's export default and game. All right, so we need to create this render moves. So this is going to be our history, basically. So let's go up here. We can create it here. We'll say const render moves equals an arrow function. And we can just implicitly return. So we'll say history.map. And then we're not going to use the step. So let's just do underscore step. And then what we want is the index. So we're going to say move, the move number, basically. All right. Create an arrow function there. So within that, we'll say const destination equals move question mark. So if move is not 0, basically, then we'll say go to move number, then move. If move is 0, then we're going to say go to start. All right, and then what are we going to return? So we'll say return. It's going to be an li with the key. Again, we're going to use the index. Try not to do this in an actual application. Okay. Then within that, we're going to set a button, and it's going to have an on click. And that is going to equal an arrow function. And we're going to create a new function here. It's going to say be jump to and pass it move. Then within the button, we'll say destination. All right, I think that should do it. All right, so render moves, history, we're mapping through each move. We're not worried about the step, we just want the index, which is move. All right, creating a destination. So basically we're creating the verbiage. We want if move is not 0, then we're going to say go to move number, whatever that number is. If it is 0, then we're going to say go to start. So we're returning a list item with key, and button on click is going to be jump to move, and then we're passing this destination into the button text. All right, so we need to create this jump to now. So let's go up here, and so we'll say const jump to. That is going to equal, that's going to be a step, right? Or that's the move, sorry. So jump to move, and we'll have an arrow function there. So we're going to say set step number. Maybe I should name it step. Yeah. Okay, we'll name that step. So we're going to set the step number to step, and then set x is next. And we got to figure out if it's X or O. So we'll say step, and we're going to look for a remainder. So we'll do %2. So if it is divisible by 2, we'll say 0. So if it's divisible by 2, then it should be on O. Otherwise, it would be on X. Right? So I think that should be everything. What do we have here? Why is there an li here? This should be, why does it keep doing that? That should be a fragment. So we did the square, the board, the game. We looked at the helper. That's how it's figuring out who wins. We're not going to go into the CSS. And then we have our index. So let's go and create our index. So we're going to import React from React. And then we're going to import React DOM from React DOM. And we're going to import our index CSS. And we're going to import our game from /components/game. All right, so then we'll just say React DOM.render, and then we're going to render the game into document.getElementById and root. All right, I think that should be everything. Let's save that, and let's save the game. All right, let's open up the terminal, and let's npm start and see what happens. All right, this is looking okay. Let's see if it works. All right, there's an X, and now we have a new history. So we say go to move 1. Next player is O. There we go. Here's our next history item has just popped up. Now X is next. There we go. All right, let's say O again. Now X, and now O. Now we have a winner. Winner is O. All right, now if we want to go back in time, let's go back to step 5. Now there's no winner. Step 4, 3. Now if we're on the third one, if we go forward again, it's going to erase what was before that. And if we go to start and we click, then it's going to start the history over. So it's overwriting the history as we go back. All right, like I said, the code for this is on GitHub. Link is in the description below. I want you to go ahead and build this and go through each step and figure out why all of this works the way that it does, okay? You're going to learn by doing. So go ahead and create this on your own, change a few lines, break it, figure out how it works. That's the way that you learn. Like this video to help me out, and subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.